Alright, welcome back. We've got 4 chan threads tonight that are messed up in every way. Material that's dark and deeply disturbing. These are the stories. Hit like, subscribe, turn it up, and we'll get into it.
The query showed up at 2:47 in the morning, and nobody had asked for it. I was on my third coffee, feet up on the desk, watching the log feed scroll on the left monitor. That's basically the job. You sit in a beige room in the basement of the Forensic Science building on 9th Street, you watch the CODIS mirror and the state indexer talk to each other, and every once in a while, you approve a batch upload from one of the county labs. Most nights, the most exciting thing that happens is the vending machine on the second floor makes a noise like it's dying. That night, the log printed a line I'd never seen before. Query _init/src internal/user-/target profile 048-11-something. It flashed and then it was gone, replaced by the next line and the next. I sat up. I scrolled back. The reason it stuck out is that there's a field where the initiating user goes. Analyst ID, court order reference, an external agency ticket, something. That field was blank. Not system, not admin, not even a placeholder. Just an empty string with a dash. In 8 years, the machine had never done that. I want to be clear about something. This isn't the kind of building where weird things happen. It's fluorescent lights, an off-white tile, and a break room with a coffee maker somebody's mom donated in 2015. There's a security desk upstairs, but past 11 p.m., it's just Marcus reading a Clive Cussler paperback, and me. That's it. The whole floor. I've been down there enough winters that I know which pipe in the ceiling ticks when the heat kicks on. It ticked while I was scrolling back through the log. That's the only sound I remember for that stretch. I pulled up the query record. The target was a full 13 loci STR pattern, our older format, not the expanded 20 they moved to a while back, which meant the profile itself had been entered into the system a long time ago. I copied the identifier over to the case management side and opened it, and that's when I got the first bad feeling. The profile belonged to a man who died in April 2011. I know because the record had a death certificate attachment. Car accident, I-64 outside Charlottesville. He was 34. His profile was in our database because he'd been a suspect in an unrelated case in 2008 and cleared, and per policy, the sample got retained. Nothing about him was flagged. No open case, no cold case reference, no pending appeal. He was, from the system's point of view, a closed folder with a headstone on top of it, and something inside that same system had decided, at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in January, to go looking for him. I sat there for a minute. Genuinely, I just sat there. You have to understand, everything in that building is logged. Every keystroke, every mouse movement past a certain threshold, every query, every login. There is a person who initiates a search, or there is an automated batch from a specific known source, and both of those things leave fingerprints all over the ticket. This ticket had none. It was a ghost with a case number. The search ran against the full national index, took about 4 minutes. I watched the progress bar the whole time. I didn't touch anything. I didn't want to touch anything. Part of me was still telling myself this was a display glitch, and any second the field would fill in with somebody's analyst ID, and I'd feel stupid. It didn't fill in. At 2:51, the query returned. 0 hits. No partial matches, no familial hits at the 20% threshold, nothing. The system generated its little PDF summary, filed it in a directory I'd never had reason to open before, and closed itself out. Status: complete. As if someone had asked politely, been told no, and gone home. I got up and walked the length of the hallway to the printer alcove and back. I don't know why, I just needed to move. Marcus's radio was playing some AM talk station 3 floors up, faint through the vents, some guy going on about the FAA. I stood by the printer and looked at the little green light on it, and I couldn't shake the thought that the printer was going to start up too. It didn't. I went back to my chair and I wrote the incident up. I wrote it up very carefully. I did not editorialize. I said, at 2:47:14, the mirror initiated a search against the national index with a null user field, targeting an archived profile from 2008 belonging to a deceased individual, and returned no hits at 2:51:02. I attached the log excerpt. I flagged it. Priority 2 for IT, and forwarded it to the shift supervisor's inbox. Then I sat, and I stared at the monitor for the rest of the night, waiting for the machine to do it again. It didn't. The rest of the shift was the ticking pipe and the coffee maker and nothing else. When Denise came in at 7 to take over, I told her about it in the doorway, and she gave me the look people give you when you've clearly been awake too long. I didn't push, I went home, and I slept badly. The IT guys took it seriously, to their credit. There's a subcontractor named Reeve who handles the deeper legacy stuff, guys who've been in that building since the servers were physical boxes you could kick. Reeve pulled 2 juniors, and they went through it for the better part of 3 weeks. I know because they had to interview me twice, and the second time, Reeve looked tired in a way I hadn't seen him look before. Here's what they found. There was a script. It had been sitting on the indexer since 2009. A short one, a couple hundred lines, written in the old syntax the state used before the last big migration. It was configured to run exactly once, initiate a single comparison against a specific profile, log the result, and then delete itself. Instead, when it ran back in 2009, it hung, got stuck in a wait state at some line where it was trying to check a resource that no longer existed. And there it sat, for 14 years. Idle. Passed over during every audit because it wasn't consuming any resources and wasn't listed as active. In January of 2023, the state pushed a routine update to the underlying platform. The update changed how idle processes were handled at the kernel level. Reeve said it in a way I didn't quite follow, but the short version was that the update accidentally poked the script, and the script, being an obedient little script, woke up and finished the job it had been assigned in 2009. The job was to search the national DNA index for this specific person. The specific person in 2009 had been alive. Reeve tried to figure out who wrote the script. He couldn't. The account that pushed it to the server didn't exist anymore. It was one of those legacy service accounts from before individual sign-on, when 3 or 4 analysts shared one credential to save time. Any one of maybe a dozen people from that era could have set it up. Half of them are retired. 1 is dead. Reeve called 2 of the retired ones. Neither remembered anything about a custom script, and both sounded, he said, genuinely confused. Nobody could tell him why it had been set up. Whether it was research, whether it was somebody quietly checking on someone, whether it was meant to run once a night and got the config wrong, there was no comment in the code, no ticket, no email trail, just the instruction and a name. The man died in 2011. The script fired in 2023. In between, for 2 full years, somebody could have run that search manually and gotten a live hit. Nobody did. I still work nights there. The building hasn't changed. The pipe still ticks. Every so often, I catch myself watching that user field in the log, waiting for another dash. The job came through a site called Kesselwork, one of those anonymized freelance boards that lets clients drop files without ever telling you who they are. I'd been using it for maybe 8 months by the time this happened, mostly because the rates were better than Rev, and nobody made you do a face check. That November, it rained every day in Portland. I'm on the 2nd floor of a walk-up off Alberta, and my desk faces the parking lot, so I mostly stared at wet asphalt and the same 3 cars while I worked. Headphones on from about 9 in the morning to whenever I gave up. That was the routine. The client came in as ordering party 4471. No name, no bio. The brief said academic research, comparative sociology, interview transcripts from a longitudinal study, English to English, verbatim, timestamped every 30 seconds. Standard boring work. They paid a flat rate per audio minute, 40% up front, which is unusual on that platform. I remember thinking that was generous and not thinking much past it. The first file was a woman in her 60s talking about growing up in Ohio, 40 minutes. The interviewer, a man, asked questions in a soft voice. He never coughed, never repeated himself. His questions were oddly precise. What time did your father come home from work? Did he own a firearm? Did you have relatives in Cleveland? Textbook oral history, sort of, but the phrasing kept drifting toward inventory. I flagged it as strange in my head and moved on. The second file was a man, maybe 30, talking about his commute in Sacramento. Same interviewer, same slow, patient voice. This one ran an hour 10. Halfway through, I noticed the interviewee's answers had that quality people get when they're tired and just want to be done. Flat. Compliant. But I've transcribed police interviews before, cold case volunteer stuff, and this didn't have the shape of an interrogation exactly. There were no accusations, no pressure, just questions, and someone answering. I turned in the second file on a Sunday. The third one came in Tuesday morning. I always listen through once before I start typing, just to hear the audio quality and set my levels. I made a cup of coffee, sat down, pressed play, and immediately my stomach did this thing where it drops without warning. It was Cass. Cass lived in 2B, right below me. She was maybe 28, worked at a bakery on Killingsworth, had a rescue mutt named Peanut. We weren't close, but we did the neighbor thing, borrowed sugar once, watched each other's mail during trips. In August, she stopped answering the door. Peanut was in the apartment for 2 days barking before her sister showed up with a spare key. I remember standing in the hallway while the sister called the police. The story we all got was that Cass had walked out sometime between Thursday night and Saturday morning. No signs of a struggle. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. Her car was in the lot. missing persons flyers went up around the neighborhood for about 6 weeks. And then, they came down. That was her voice in my headphones. I paused the file. I sat there. The rain was doing that thing where it comes sideways and hits the window like handfuls of gravel. I remember thinking, no, it's someone who sounds like her. Voices are voices. I've misidentified friends on podcasts before, so I unpaused it and kept listening. She said her name, first name only. She said she was from Portland. She said she worked at a bakery, and then she corrected herself and said used to work at a bakery. The interviewer asked her about her sister. She answered. He asked what days her sister usually called her. She answered. He asked whether her mother was still in Boise. She said yes. He asked if her mother lived alone. There was a pause after that one. Not a long pause. Maybe 3 seconds. Then Cass said, she does. She has a downstairs tenant, but they don't really talk. The interviewer said, thank you. I stopped the file. I got up and I walked around my apartment for a while. I didn't cry. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just walked from the kitchen to the bathroom to the living room and back, and I kept thinking, this is a mistake. This is a mistake. This is a mistake. And none of the walking made it less of a mistake. The thing that got me most, honestly, wasn't the questions. It was her voice. She sounded fine. She sounded like she was talking to a dentist. There was no shake in it, no code words. Just a tired woman answering questions on a Tuesday afternoon somewhere. I finished listening to the whole thing before I did anything else. I don't know why. Part of me thought if I stopped, I'd lose whatever chance there was to know something. It ran 52 minutes. Toward the end, the interviewer asked her about the layout of her mother's apartment building, number of exits, whether the front gate was locked at night. Then he thanked her again, and the file ended with about 4 seconds of room tone, a refrigerator humming somewhere, a car passing outside. I did not turn in the transcript. I copied the audio to a USB drive, and I copied it again to my laptop, and I emailed a copy to myself, and then I called the non-emergency line for Portland police because I couldn't remember what you were supposed to do with something like this. They sent a detective the next morning. His name was Ray. He was very calm about the whole thing, which I appreciated. He listened to about 90 seconds of the file in my kitchen with one earbud in, and then he took the earbud out and asked if I could send everything to an address he wrote down. I did. He told me not to log back into the client platform until he called me and not to answer any messages from ordering party 4471. I didn't hear anything for 11 days. When Ray called back, he told me a few things in a specific order. The lab had confirmed the voice was Cass, high confidence match against a voicemail her sister had saved. The recording was authentic, not spliced, not synthesized, and Cass was alive. They'd located her in a town outside Elko, Nevada, staying at a long-term motel. She had walked into the front office 3 days earlier and asked to extend her stay by a month. She was not being held. There was no one with her. When the sheriff's deputies drove out to talk to her, she confirmed her name and confirmed she was the missing person on the report, and she declined to say anything else. She told them she was cooperating by choice and that no crime had been committed against her. She would not name anyone. She would not come home. Ray said this the way you'd tell someone their flight got delayed. Then he said the client account, ordering party 4471, had been paid through a chain of prepaid cards routed from 3 different countries. No usable identity behind it. The platform had suspended the account, cooperated fully, and had nothing useful in the logs. I asked him what the interviews were for. He said he didn't know. He said that in his opinion, and he was very careful to call it his opinion, whoever was running this had a list, and the list was long, and Cass had answered because she decided to answer, and there was no law he could point at that would change any of that. I stopped freelancing on Kessel work. I moved to direct clients, and eventually out of transcription entirely. For about 6 months after Ray's call, I got occasional emails from other translators in a small forum I was part of, asking if anyone else was seeing jobs from a client that paid 40% upfront and sent verbatim interview audio with no context. The last one of those messages I got was in May of 2020 from a woman in Vancouver who wanted to know if it was safe to take the work. I didn't answer her. I still don't know what I should have said. The summer of 2021 in Phoenix was one of those where the asphalt didn't cool off until about 4 in the morning, and even then, only barely. I was working nights for a small cab company off Van Buren, 12 cars in the fleet, 1 dispatcher per shift. Just me, a Dell tower, 3 monitors, and a wall unit AC that sounded like a coin loose in a dryer. The job was mostly boring. Bar runs, airport runs, hospital runs. The dispatch software showed every car as a colored dot moving over a map, and if you sat there long enough, your brain started to know how the city breathed at 2 a.m. You knew which routes made sense. Sky Harbor to Tempe, Mill Avenue to Arcadia, the shortcuts guys used to skip the light on 24th Street. After a couple months, I could look at a dot and roughly guess where it was going before the driver even called it in, which is how I first noticed the thing with Ruben. Ruben had been with the company longer than anyone but the owner. Mid-50s, quiet, drove a beat-up Crown Vic with the seats duct-taped in 2 places. Customers didn't complain about him. Owner liked him. On paper, he was the model driver. But one night in late June, around 1:30, I dispatched him to pick up a girl from a bar on 7th Avenue, going home to a condo near Camelback. Straightforward run. Should have been 12, maybe 14 minutes. I watched his dot leave 7th, and instead of taking Indian School east, it went north on 15th, then cut west into a stretch of warehouses off Grand. I remember frowning and thinking, alright, maybe construction. Then the dot slowed down, not stopped, just crawled through a block where I knew for a fact there was no reason to crawl, then it looped back onto Grand and finally delivered her home. The ride took 31 minutes. Meter was $34 instead of the usual $16. She paid in cash, tipped him $5, according to Ruben's own log entry when he came back on the radio. I flagged it in my head and let it go. Drivers pad meters. It happens. If I called out every guy who took the long way once, I'd have no drivers left. 2 nights later, same thing. Different girl, picked up outside a hookah lounge on McDowell, going to an apartment complex near 40th Street. He took her south almost to the airport before swinging back north. 28-minute ride for what should have been 10. Third time was on a Sunday. I stopped assuming. I started keeping a little notepad file on the second monitor. Not a formal thing, just date, time, pickup, drop off, passenger description if I had it from the booking, and the actual GPS path Ruben took versus what any sane driver would do. Our software let me pull the breadcrumb trail on any completed ride, second by second. It also stored the passenger's phone number and whatever name they'd given when they called in. Within 4 days, I had 6 rides logged. Then I looked at what they had in common. All of them were women. All of them sounded young on the phone, the kind of young you can hear in the vowels. All were solo. All were between 12:30 and 3 a.m. All the routes went through empty parts of the city, warehouses, the industrial strip near Buckeye, that dark stretch of Grand Avenue where the streetlights are further apart than they should be. And here's the part that made me feel sick before I could put words to it. Ruben's return times to the garage, after dropping these girls off, were shorter than the honest route would have been. He'd take 30 minutes to deliver them, then come back to base in 8. He knew the fast way. He was choosing the slow way only while they were in the car. I sat with that for maybe an hour on a Wednesday night, drinking gas station coffee that had gone cold, staring at the wall where the shift rotation was pinned up. My hands felt fine. My chest didn't feel fine. I remember thinking very clearly that if I was wrong about this, I was calling a man a monster over some bad driving. And if I was right, I'd already watched him do it 6 times and said nothing. I kept logging for another week. 10 more rides. 8 of them fit the pattern. The 2 that didn't were both men going to the airport. Straight shots. No games. At one point, on a Friday around 2 a.m., I was watching his dot in real time on a run with a girl going from a club on Roosevelt back to her place off 19th Avenue. He took her south. Way south, down past Lower Buckeye, where there's nothing but transfer stations and a couple of scrap yards. His dot stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. For 4 minutes, I picked up the radio mic, sat there with my thumb on the button. I could not think of a single thing to say that wouldn't sound insane if I was wrong, or wouldn't spook him if I was right. I ended up asking, in the flattest voice I could manage, for a status check on his current fare. Long pause, then he came back and said, "All good, just had to pull over, got a call from my kid." His dot started moving again. He delivered her 20 minutes later. She paid in cash. She was fine, as far as I ever knew. I finished my shift with my hands shaking on the wheel of my own car on the way home. On the Monday, I asked the owner, Dave, for a private meeting before shift. He was a guy in his 60s who'd started the company after leaving a bigger fleet, and he did not like drama. I brought a printed folder, GPS maps, ride logs, a spreadsheet with times, routes, meter amounts, and passenger info, scrubbed down to first name and phone number only. I laid it out on his desk and walked him through it without editorializing. I said, "This is what I've watched him do for 2 weeks." I said I didn't know for a fact anything worse than meter fraud was happening. I said I didn't want to be the guy who sat on it if it turned out to be more. Dave read the whole folder twice. He didn't say much. Then he picked up the phone and called Ruben in for a shift Ruben was not scheduled for. Ruben showed up 40 minutes later in flip-flops and a Diamondbacks shirt. Dave fired him at the door, in front of me, cash out of the register for his last 2 days, keys to the Crown Vic back on the hook. No conversation, no explanation. Ruben's face didn't move. He just took the money, dropped the keys, and walked out. I told Dave I wanted the file to go to Phoenix PD as well. He looked at me for a long second, and I remember he sighed and said, "You sure?" I said, "If I'm wrong, they'll toss it in a drawer, and if I'm right, I don't want it staying in this office." He nodded and said he'd call a detective he knew from a case years back. 2 officers came to the garage the next afternoon. They took the folder, took the raw GPS exports off our server, took my statement in a back room for about 90 minutes. They asked good, patient questions. They asked whether I'd ever seen him do anything physical, and I said no. They asked whether any of the women had complained, and I said not that I knew of. They wrote everything down. They gave me a card and said someone would be in touch if they needed anything else. Nobody was ever in touch. I kept working nights at that company for another year. Ruben never came back to pick up a check, never called, never showed up on any driver roster anywhere in the valley that I heard about, and I asked around. Dave never brought his name up again. Once, months later, I asked him if he'd heard anything from the detective. He shook his head, didn't look up from the schedule, and said, "You did the right thing. Leave it there." I don't know what they found. I don't know if there was anything to find beyond the meters. I know he stopped his car for 4 minutes in a scrapyard at 2 a.m. with a girl in the back seat, and I know he came back to base in 8 minutes flat, and I know his face didn't move when he was fired. The job was supposed to be a 2-day pull. Old clinic off Butler Street in Lawrenceville, closed since 2016. Family practice on the ground floor, and some kind of neuro rehab suite on the second. My company handles medical decom in Western PA, everything from imaging equipment down to exam tables, and by April 2019, I had been doing it about 6 years. You get a rhythm. You forget the buildings are anything other than boxes with wiring. This one was routine right up until the last room. The clinic sat behind a Rite Aid, brick, 2 stories, one of those buildings that looks older than it is because nobody had touched the facade since the 70s. Power was cut at the main. We ran off a portable rig, a couple of clip lights, and a small inverter for the drills. My partner for the week, a guy named Rob, called out sick Tuesday morning, so I finished the second floor alone. I did the exam rooms first. Standard. Autoclaves, a busted centrifuge, rolling stools with the vinyl cracked to hell. Everything tagged, everything on the manifest. I ate lunch in the truck, listening to a Pirates preseason game on the radio. Cold sandwich, thermos coffee going metallic. Normal day. The last room was at the end of the hall past a door that still had a paper sign taped to it. EEG Suite. Someone had written under it in Sharpie, moved to 214, but 214 didn't exist on this floor. I checked the manifest. The room was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. There was a machine against the far wall. Old unit, beige plastic, roll-around cart with 4 wheels, one of them locked. I did not recognize the model. That in itself wasn't strange. Hospitals cycle through equipment across decades, and you see stuff from the 80s still tucked in storage closets. This looked older. The brand plate on the side had been scraped off. Just a rectangle of exposed metal where the label used to be. I logged it, walked around it, checked the back. No power cord. Not unplugged, not coiled, not missing. There was no cord socket. Where the plug should have been, there was a blank panel, 4 screws, factory sealed. I remember standing there for a second, trying to figure out if I was looking at a battery unit. There was no battery compartment either. I marked it non-operational on my sheet and went to get the dolly. When I came back, the screen was on. It's a small CRT, maybe 7 inches, built into the top of the cart, green phosphor, and there were traces on it. 6 channels, rolling right to left the way they do on those old strip displays, only this one was digital, or half digital, the way transitional equipment used to look in the mid-90s. The lines were moving, not flat, not the drift you get from ambient electrical noise, actual waveforms, peaks and troughs at regular but not identical intervals. I stood in the doorway and watched it for probably a full minute. I did not go closer. My first thought was that some capacitor somewhere was holding a charge and the unit was doing a self-test. I have seen equipment do weird things on residual power. Fax machines chirp. Old X-ray tubes hum for a while after you kill the mains. This did not look like a self-test. Self-tests loop. They repeat. What I was watching didn't repeat. It changed. I got closer. The lead cables were coiled and clipped to a hook on the side of the cart. Nothing was attached to a patient because there was no patient. The clips were sitting there in a plastic tray, 21 of them, gold-colored, the wires bundled with a rubber band. The waveforms shifted. One channel got faster, another went quieter, almost flat, then picked up again in a different rhythm. It looked, and I say this because I've watched enough of these get calibrated in working clinics to know, it looked like someone thinking, like a person had just been asked a question and was working the answer out. I said out loud, "Okay, that's enough of that." I don't know why I said it. My voice sounded very flat in that room. The clip lights buzzed. Somewhere down the hall, a pipe ticked the way old pipes do in April when the building starts to warm up during the day and cool at night. I killed my inverter. I switched off the clip light nearest the machine. I stepped back into the hallway and shut off the second clip light too, so the only source of illumination in that room was the CRT itself, greenish, throwing a rectangle of light onto the linoleum. The traces kept moving. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I've thought about it a lot. I didn't run. I didn't call anyone. I stood in the hallway for maybe 10 minutes and watched the screen through the open door. At one point, one of the channels spiked, hard, a single tall peak, and then settled back into its rhythm. If you have ever seen an EEG of somebody being startled, you know what that looks like. That is what it looked like. I went downstairs and got the dolly. Loading it was the worst part. I had to touch the cart. I had to lean it back onto the wheels and push it, and the whole time the screen was inches from my face, and the lines kept doing what they were doing. I did not look at the screen. I looked at my boots. I looked at the door frame and the top of the stairs. I walked it down the ramp we had set up over the back steps, and I rolled it into the box truck, and I strapped it down against the wall with 2 ratchet straps. The screen was still on when I closed the roll-up door. I drove it to the yard in Hazelwood. The guy on intake that day was a heavyset man everybody called Petey, and he asked me the usual questions, and I gave him the usual answers. He asked if everything was operational or scrap. I looked at my manifest. I had marked the EEG non-operational earlier, in the room, before it did what it did. I crossed that out. I wrote functional. I don't fully know why. Part of it was that I did not want to explain. Part of it was that if I marked it non-op, they would have set it aside for me to sign an incident form, and I'd have had to describe what I saw on paper with my name on it. Part of it, and this is the part I don't like, was that I wanted it out of my truck and out of my problem, and I was afraid that if I called it broken, somebody would try to fix it. Petey initialed the sheet. I drove home. I slept badly for 2 nights, and then I stopped thinking about it, the way you do. A week later, I got an email from a tech at the yard. Not Petey. A guy named Marcus who does the actual breakdown work, pulls the boards, separates the copper, sorts the plastics. Short message. Hey man, quick question about that beige EEG unit you brought in on the 14th. We had it apart on the bench. Most of it's dead, no problem, but there's one board, sort of the middle stack. It's still showing activity on a meter when I probe it. No cell in it, no cap that big. Weirdest thing. What's the model number? I want to look it up. I read the email twice. I wrote back 1 line. I don't know. I never knew. That was true. I still don't. Marcus never wrote again, and I didn't ask. And the next month I put in for a route change and started doing dental offices instead. Dental offices are fine. Dental offices have cords.
That's where we leave the questions unanswered and the mystery intact. I'm grateful you stuck with me all the way through. Which thread's living rent-free in your mind? Tell me in the comments. There's a whole archive of darkness waiting. Don't sleep easy. I'll find you in the next one.